Well, my name is Sally Dunne, and for almost 8 years, I have been Loretto's representative at the United Nations. Um, it's been the most marvelous thing that's ever happened in my life, and I still, I still marvel at the fact that it happened. It still feels like sort of a miracle that it happened. My history with Loretto goes all the way back to my high school. I attended Narix Hall in St. Louis. I was in the same graduating class with some pretty amazing people that many in the community know. Barb Roach, Mary Catherine Rabbit, Ann Manganero, Barb Mecker, Mary Louise Denny, pretty amazing class. And all those folks, and when we graduated from high school, went off to the mother house in Kentucky to join the convent, right? And I, many years later, very late in my life, something kind of drew me back to Loretto while I was in the process of becoming a co-member. My predecessor at the UN office made it known that she was going to be ready to be replaced, and something just seized me with, my gosh, I would love to do that kind of work. And I was actually selected to be, very humbled to say this, I was selected to be the first co-member to represent our community at the United Nations. I have often, in telling my story, I've often talked about how what Narix did for me was really solidify my value system. The values that I have held for my entire life are the ones that really got put into place when I was at Narix and through my exposure to and interactions with the Sisters of Loretto. Now, they don't get all the credit. You know, my mom and dad initially were the ones, and I would say, well, both my mom and dad, but my mom most especially, was very liberal, very social justice oriented, very much care for each and every person, very much anti-racism, and taught us all that you need to confront those things whenever you encounter them. So I arrived at Narix with a pretty solid value system, but like I say, it really got solidified there, and I felt like I was sent off into the world very well equipped. What does it mean that the Loretto community is a non-governmental organization? Some 25 years ago, the decision was made by the Loretto community, and it was an official decision made at one of our assemblies, that in order to have an impact on these systems that are keeping the people that we want to accompany and want to be present with and for, keeping them marginalized. Systems that are keeping folks marginalized and living in poverty and having human rights violations imposed upon them. The systemic problems need to be addressed as well as the needs of the individuals. And so that long ago, Loretto figured out that, the saying, think globally and act locally. Well, Loretto figured that out a long time ago and said we need to be present where decisions are made that are affecting literally every person in the world. And that place is at the United Nations. And so we applied some years ago to be accredited by the UN. And we have been an official NGO with UN accreditation for a number of years. I mentioned all my predecessors in this position have been Sisters of Loretto. I guess we sent the first Sister of Loretto to New York in the early 90s. And it's been a succession of really wonderful, passionate, talented, capable Sisters of Loretto who have established kind of our presence and our legacy there. And I so benefited from walking in their footsteps. The first Sister of Loretto to go to the United Nations is Pat Canoyer. And to this day, every now and then, I still will encounter somebody and we introduce ourselves, and yes, I'm the Loretto community representative. And somebody will say, "Oh, Loretto, I know Loretto. How's Pat? How's Sister Pat?" So Loretto has quite a recognized and respected presence at the United Nations. When I arrived in New York at the United Nations, and Mary Peter was kind of showing me the ropes and all, probably the first meeting I attended with her was a meeting of a group called RUN, Religious at the UN. And this is a group, it's an informal group whose members are the sisters and brothers and priests who are there representing their Catholic religious congregations. It's a group of about 40 to 45 people, representing about 30 different NGOs. So these are other Catholic congregations that have achieved UN accreditation, just like Loretto has. Most of them haven't been there as long as Loretto has, but collectively, we're a very powerful force. We are a moral voice at the UN, and our presence, the moral authority that we bring to the advocacy that we do is recognized. Even though we collectively, the members of RUN, kind of maintain our independence from each other. We do not present ourselves ever as we're the Catholic NGOs representing the Catholic Church, because that's not what we're doing. We are each there representing the values of our congregation and the priorities and the most important issues that our congregations wish us to be involved with as their UN representative. So just like any other NGO, whether it's a secular NGO or another faith-based NGO, each NGO representative is there representing the values and the priorities of his or her organization or congregation. Now, all of us in RUN obviously have a great deal in common and great shared values. And so what we do is we meet once a month on the first Wednesday of every month. That's why I'm saying this was probably the first meeting that Mary Peter took me to. And it's informal. We meet for some spiritual time together, for some mutual support, for some sharing among ourselves of current events, current issues going on within the various issues that we're working on, because no one of us is working on every single issue. So I rely a great deal on hearing from my colleagues about the status of, many of them work on eliminating human trafficking. And that is not a specific issue that I have myself devoted my time and energy to personally, because my intern and I are working on other things. But the beauty of this is that since all these issues that we're working on at the UN collectively are all interrelated, right? So it's almost like if you're working on one, you're working on them all. And with great confidence, okay, I'm working on these 4 or 5, and I know other good people are working on those other ones, and so collectively, we feel confident that we're having the impact that we want to have. So when I talk about this being the first meeting I attended, the implication there is that a lot of what we do in doing our work at the UN is through meetings. So there's this RUN group that meets once a month, as I said, on the first Wednesday of the month. There are other, what we call NGO committees, that are focused around one or more of these issues that I keep talking about. So for instance, there's an NGO committee on migration, and the issues that that committee feels passionately about and deals and advocates around are the rights of migrant workers and their families, the rights of undocumented immigrants, The fact that when someone crosses an artificial border between two countries, you don't check your human rights at the door. You maintain your human rights no matter where you are, and human rights are universal. We advocate for the needs and the rights of refugees, refugee populations, no matter where they come from, where they're located, or what forced them into the status of being a refugee. Again, they still have rights and they have needs. And the world collectively is doing a woefully inadequate job of meeting the needs of the refugees around the world. And just as an aside, I will say that it's estimated that we currently have 260 million people globally who have been displaced from their homes for one reason or another, either refugees, fleeing conflict, fleeing climate change and its impacts, or fleeing economic distress and an inability to provide for their families. So some people call those economic refugees. A lot of people don't even want to use the word refugee for that population, thinking rather smugly, in my opinion, that, well, they're not really refugees. They've chosen to move. They just want to go find a better life. Well, don't we all? Don't we all want to go find a better life for ourselves and our families? So one thing I love is the opportunity that I've had, along with all of my colleagues who do similar advocacy, to bring a sense of compassion to the UN and to be a model for the member states of the United Nations to embed that sense of compassion in the global policies that they're debating. With regard to the RUN group, I've already mentioned that it was probably the first meeting that I went to, and maybe I should have figured this out ahead of time, and maybe it would have been obvious to somebody else, but I just didn't really think about the fact that when I got to the UN and when I took over the job from Mary Peter, it just hadn't occurred to me that along with the position would come this most marvelous community that I was suddenly a member of. I was suddenly a part of RUN simply because I was there representing Loretto. And once again, in the way in which Loretto has to kind of be on the cutting edge, I was the first non-vowed person who was a member of RUN. Up until I showed up, all the members of RUN had always said, well, we are, vowed sisters and brothers and priests, and we're here representing. And we're not open to participation from Catholic lay organizations because we're the vowed members. We're the religious of the Catholic Church, and we're here representing our religious congregations. And then I show up, and I'm not a religious, and I'm representing really more than a religious congregation. I'm representing the Loretto community. And there was just no question, ever, no question, well, will we let Sally join or not? Of course, Sally is a member of RUN. And it's just been a marvelous experience to have. Wonderful community to support me and other new people when they come. Great mutuality, great, let me know. So is there anything I can do to help? You want to learn about this issue or that issue? Well, here's the expert to go to learn about what the history of that issue has been here at the UN. So it's just a marvelous support system that I had no idea I would fall into when I got there. Ever since my high school, I'd always thought of Loretto's as being out there on the edge, right? Just, pushing the envelope, being in the forefront. And lo and behold, I was educated when I got into RUN. They are hardly any more any less liberal or any less progressive than the Lorettos are. They are right there with all the issues that I'm there advocating in the name of Loretto. They're there too. Mainly because they for the most part, they are human rights issues. And human rights are universal. And you don't get to pick and choose. And sometimes within the structures of the Catholic Church, there's some picking and choosing going on, but not at the UN, because it applies to everybody. Okay, so one of the things that I have most appreciated, one of the aspects of what it's been like for me representing the Loretto community, um, is, well, first of all, it's kind of unique. I'm a member of the Loretto community, and I'm also representing the community at the UN, and it's such a privilege, first of all, to do that. And always with me is the sense of I am here to represent the values of Loretto. When I first got the job, there was a meeting in St. Louis, a community-wide meeting in St. Louis, and I remember my Loretto volunteer who was being my intern that year, Ashley Steimer, and I traveled to St. Louis, and we had we were given, I think, 20 minutes on the agenda. And we had it all planned out. We were going to go through a brief presentation of all the different NGO committees that we as Loretto might want to be a part of, committees that are working on things that we value. So Ashley and I thought, well, this will be a breeze. We'll just talk about all the different possible NGO committees that we could join and participate in the name of Loretto. And then we'll just facilitate a conversation, dialogue with all the members in the room. And then we'll get from the group, okay, what are the priorities you want us to work on? Well, that didn't happen. that just kind of didn't happen. And after 2 or 3 stabs at it, finally, I recall my friend Mary Louise said, Sally, I think you're just kind of not getting it here. She said, I'm not think you're getting us yet. She said, what we here in Loretto do, and I was brand new, right, to the community. She said, what we in Loretto do is different folks are out doing whatever work they're doing in the name of Loretto. And what we do is give total and utter confidence and support to that person, to that individual, and whatever that individual decides is the right thing to do, we support that. So you're not going to get us to tell you collectively what we want you to work on. So Ashley and I go traipsing back to New York, and we figure, well, wasn't that interesting? But what I want to say is how wonderful that feels to be that supported, and how freeing it was and is and continues to be to this day to know that my judgment and those choices and decisions that I make in representing Loretto are so totally and completely supported by the community. It's a level of empowerment that I could just hardly have dreamed of, that I've been the recipient of in these 8 years that I've been representing Loretto. And it's to me, it's so Loretto, There are NGO committees, and there are also groups that call themselves working groups. One of the groups that Loretto, long before I got to New York, that Loretto had been involved in for quite some time, is a group called the Working Group on Girls. And the origin of the Working Group on Girls dates back to the Women's Conference in Beijing in 1995, where all the critically important women's issues in the world were being addressed, negotiations were going on to get the right wording and language in the outcome document of that conference, which has come to be called the Beijing Platform for Action. And there was a group of people there who were adamantly advocating for, we have to have a singular focus on girls. Girls have needs and rights as girls, not as future women, but as girls. And we need to get the governments of the world to acknowledge that and to recognize their obligation to address the needs and the rights of girls. So, as it turns out, this Beijing Platform for Action, which had, I don't know how many, 15 or so different sections in it, A through whatever, these very effective advocates got the final section of the platform to be section L, which is called the girl child. And so the Working Group on Girls, ever since 1995, has been busy advocating putting the terms found in section L of the Beijing Platform for Action into effect. And so every year at the United Nations, there is a meeting of the Commission on the Status of Women. And the Working Group on Girls is a very active presence and force during the Commission on the Status of Women, saying, okay, all these women's issues are absolutely right on, we need to be addressing them, but we also need to be addressing these aspects and requirements of what girls around the world need. And so Loretto's been very active on this committee ever since before I showed up. And the one thing that I am really quite proud of, to be honest with you, that I've kind of taken it a step further as far as Loretto's participation with the Working Group on Girls and the Commission on the Status of Women, is that I initiated a practice of inviting students from our high schools to come to New York while the Commission on the Status of Women was in session. And in the 8 years that I've been there, every year we've had more and more students and teachers and many members of the Loretto community come to New York for this really critically important commission that goes on. And at this point, this trip, so to speak, it's one of the school trips that it's pretty well become institutionalized in our 3 schools, St. Mary's, Loretto Academy in El Paso, and Narings. It's part of what they do. You know, they have service trips here, there, and elsewhere, and one of the service trips is for those students who want to come to New York and participate in really doing, not just learning about issues affecting women and girls around the world, but really having an opportunity to do some advocacy. So I have often said, and I really believe this firmly, that probably the most important thing I've done in my tenure in our UN office is establish this legacy, which has now become institutionalized, that girls have this opportunity to have their horizons widened, to have their minds blown to some degree, to have an exposure to not just to issues, but to people from around the world who come to the UN during this particular time of the year to kind of plead their case, to advocate and call public attention to their needs and their rights that are going unmet. It gives our students just a marvelous opportunity to be exposed to these issues, and almost every one of them goes back home, writes me this little thank you note, dear Miss Dunne, dear Sally, oh, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It has been a life-changing experience for me. And if I had done nothing else, I'm really, really happy that has happened. Okay, one more aspect of my time at the UN in our office there that I want to talk about is again, it feels kind of amazing and miraculous to me, but the young women who have come to work with me for a year through our Loretto Volunteer Program have just added, I can hardly even find the words to describe the contributions that these young women have made. you all probably know about our volunteer program where young folks commit a year of their lives to service of some sort. And I have to tell you, that in itself just really kind of blows my mind that there are this many people who have such wonderful skills and abilities, and who also have the desire and the passion to be of service, to give up a year of their lives in order to be of service, and in order to learn what it's like to live in community, to create community, to live simply, and to live according to some values. It's just, our Loretto Volunteer Program is just one of the best things going, I think. And our volunteers who have worked with me, every one of them has just taught me so much, either by example or by, a number of them came to me having traveled to many places in the world that I have not had an opportunity to, and the perspectives and the life experiences and the knowledge that they bring has just so enriched and enhanced me personally in the work that we do together. And my approach to a new volunteer coming in to work with me, first of all, I call her my intern, because I think it just sort of increases the stature a little bit, because she is going, and they've always been she, by the way. I'd love to have a guy come work with me, but it hadn't happened. So my intern, after a short period of time of trying to figure out the lay of the land with the UN and all these NGO committees and all that, very quickly is right in there representing the Loretto community, just like I am. Often we will kind of split the responsibilities, and my intern will cover one or two of these NGO committees, and I'll cover a couple of others, and we'll, keep each other posted on what's going on. Sometimes we'll both serve on a committee because it's one that's important and there's a lot of work to be done. But the caliber of the volunteers that have come to work at our UN office I just can't say enough. Every year I say to folks, I think this may be the best one I've had. They just all are. And it's just something that I wanted to be sure and mention, because it has so enriched me personally, has just meant the world to me to be able to have a colleague come and work with me. And it's just expanded the breadth of the influence that Loretto can have. So one more thing I want to say about having these young women come and do a one-year volunteer year with me is, as I've described, very quickly, we are just co-workers, right? We're just peers. We're collaborating with each other. We're checking in with each other. I'm asking her, what do you think about this? And back and forth. And when you have peers that you're working with, I don't know, this is going to sound kind of silly, but it kind of, in my mind, it makes me think that we're kind of contemporaries. You know what I mean? And then and then a number of times, not every year, but a number of times, sometime during the year, the volunteers' parents come to New York to visit. And we'll go out to lunch or dinner together because she wants them to meet me and I want to meet them. And it's like jarring, because when I first meet her parents and realize I'm old enough to be their mother, and yet I'm feeling this peer relationship with their daughter. It's just fun. It's just one of the fun aspects of having these young folks come and work with me. I sometimes kind of joke about it keeps me young, but I know with the white hair it doesn't look like it. So